Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our presentation today on the MDE process, or the multidisciplinary evaluation process, and the IEP. We have a number of panelists joining us tonight, so I'm just going to kind of go around and introduce, and then we will go over some housekeeping and get started. So tonight we have Naomi Morissette, who is our school psychologist from UPE, joining us. We also have Ashley Fogarty, who is a learning support teacher at the 9th grade center. Chris Talley, who is an emotional support teacher at UPE, but will be joining us as our special ed supervisor soon for grades 4 to 6. We have Amy Hiller, who is our special ed supervisor for grades K to 3. Amy Oblock, who is our supervisor for grades 10 to 12, and I'm Katie Davis, I'm the supervisor for grades 7 to 9. So welcome tonight. Erin, can I hand it over to you for housekeeping?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Erin Crew. It's not really tech support. I just hijack the account when I need to. So some housekeeping rules for the evening. We're going to go through the presentation. If you have questions as we're going through information that you have, you can use the Q&A feature down at the bottom of the screen. Pop your question in there. I'll pull it to the side and compile everything for the end of the session, end of the presentation. If it's something we've covered, I might not pull that question in. And if it's too specific to your personal student or your child, I would suggest holding on to that question and emailing either your child's teacher, principal, or the specific grade level supervisor so that you can get that answer specific to your child. So you can go ahead and use that Q&A feature down at the bottom of the screen there. And Katie, I'll hand it back over to you. And I will ask you to unmute.
Sorry, thank you, forgot.
It wouldn't be Zoom if we didn't say it.
Technology. So thank you, thanks for the reminder. So when we have a student who is showing some needs, whether it's academically, socially, emotionally, we usually try to implement some interventions, to get started with, helping to support that student. You would do that for a period of time, and then we'll sit down as a team and possibly, make a referral for an evaluation. We might suspect that there's some needs for special education services. So, the referral is made, and then we'll issue a permission to evaluate to complete, that multidisciplinary evaluation, or what we like to use a lot of abbreviations in special ed, the MDE. It's a lot of times referred to as an initial evaluation if it's a student that's not identified as special ed. But we might also do what's called a reevaluation for a student that we already have identified. It's the same process, where we're gathering information that's formal and informal from a variety of sources to look at eligibility and how we can support that student. Our school psychologist plays a big role in that, and so this is where I'm going to pass it off to Naomi to talk to us about that process and the team and everyone that's included in that. So Naomi.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks for having me here. I'm excited to talk about evaluations. It's really what I do every day. It's what I love to do as well. And if you talk to other school psychologists in the district, I'm sure that they'll agree. As Katie said, the evaluation is really the last step, or at least one step in what's a very lengthy process often for the student. Before reaching the decision to go to an evaluation, the school team would have put in interventions, just like Katie mentioned, and taken some data on those interventions to determine whether or not they're appropriate for the child and whether or not they're working. By the time that we're getting to the point where the school team is suggesting that the child might need an evaluation, it's because they've really determined that that child is struggling to such a point or has not made progress to such a point that the interventions that have been attempted are really not successful in providing for that child's needs. And that's at the point where we're saying, well, maybe there's something else that's going on here that might necessitate special education support. And it's important to know that not only are we, when we're looking at special education support, not only are we looking at what support the child needs, but could it be possible that the child has a disability that is culminating in those needs that we're seeing at school? By the same token, we also evaluate for gifted education. And it's kind of the same thing. We're looking to see, does this child need support that would be outside of what would be enrichment possible within the regular education classroom? And that would be where we would then determine a gifted evaluation for the child. When we're looking at an evaluation, we have many members of the team who are going to be involved in that evaluation. So that would include myself or any of the other school psychologists in the buildings. And we have several school psychologists across Springford at all different levels. It includes you as the parent, and I cannot stress enough how important parents are to this process. We do gather a lot of information from you. As a school psychologist, I tell parents all the time that you know your child better than anybody else. And so your input is very important. And so your school psych might be reaching out to you to get information through what are called behavioral rating scales, which I'll address in a couple minutes, as well as input, maybe having an interview with you, some phone conversations to get some information about your child and what things are looking like at home. The school team is also, the student is also an important part of that school team. We garner a lot of information from them. Your child's teachers are very much a part of that, and we look for a lot of input from the teachers. Any related service providers, such as our occupational therapists, physical therapists, vision, speech pathologists, they are all part of that team. The school counselor, our principal, and then any other staff member who might have knowledge of that child. For example, a reading specialist or an instructional support specialist. They're all people who are going to provide input to the evaluation process. So as part of the evaluation process, we're collecting a lot of data. Anyone who knows a school psych will tell you that we love our data. In fact, some of us have t-shirts and mugs letting you know how much we love data. And it's because that data is so important, because we take all of it and put it together to determine whether or not a child is eligible for special ed. The more data that we have, the better that determination is going to be. Some of the formal data that we might include would be cognitive assessments. So looking at the ability that a child is bringing with them to school every day. For example, their problem solving ability or their working memory ability, among others. We're looking at achievement assessments. So how is the child achieving in reading and writing and math and listening as compared to all other children their age? And when we're looking at other children their age, that is right across the United States. We're looking at assessments of social, emotional, and behavioral functioning. So are we seeing areas of in anything with the child's behavior, be it attention or anxiety, signs of depression, signs of emotionality that might be impacting them in the classroom? We look at measures of perceptual functioning, which look at auditory, visual, and motor presentations that might be impacting the child. We looked at their adaptive or their ADLs. There's one of our acronyms of their activities of daily learning skills. We might also ask for a functional behavior assessment, which is completed by our behavior therapists, who do a really thorough assessments, including observations, to see what the child's behavior looks like in school and how that might be impeding learning. And then we take into account a lot of that curriculum-based data that you receive information on throughout the school year. So PSSAs and Keystones, MAP scores, any testing data that the teacher collects in class. And then on top of that, for some students, we also have our related service providers provide some information. So our speech, our occupational therapist, physical therapy, and hearing and vision. And I think we're really fortunate that in Springford, we have all of those individuals who can provide information towards the evaluation. In addition to the formal data, we also collect informal data. And so this might look like teacher input, parent input. We do student interviews. Often your school psychologists or school counselors will go in and do classroom observations. We're kind of like a fly on the wall, checking out what your child is up to in the classroom. We look at report cards and progress, as well as the intervention progress that the school team has taken prior to referral. We're looking at things like behavioral, attendance, and disciplinary data. And then we also look at review of existing records. I will say it's important to note that not all of the assessments that either formal or informal that I've just gone through will be completed or even are appropriate to be completed for every child and every evaluation. For example, if we were to refer, or if a child was to be referred for a reading need and there were no behavioral concerns from the teacher or any of the staff members in school, then we wouldn't be doing something like a functional behavior assessment because it just wouldn't be appropriate for that child. And then in terms of the timelines, typically we have what's called a 60-day timeline. We're looking at gathering all of that information, talking to all of the team members, completing our observations, completing formal assessments and testing with the children, and that's the school psychologists as well as the related service providers, scoring everything and compiling it, and then making a determination for special education or gifted education eligibility and issuing that report to the parent and the team within 60 days. That eligibility determination is very much a team process, and so it's never just the psychologist who's making that determination alone. It's based on all of that data that's collected. And it's important to note too that that 60-day timeline starts from the day that the signed permission is received by the district at our special ed offices and not the day that the evaluation is requested. And then finally, we're looking at determining eligibility. So as a school team, we look at what's commonly called the two-pronged question. First, does the child meet eligibility criteria under a classification defined by IDEA? And IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's a national special education law that guarantees students with disabilities free and appropriate education. And there are 13 different categories that we have available open to us, and you can see those under number 1. Some of them are very specific to students, for example, a hearing impairment, deaf blindness, visual impairments, and then others are ones that as school psychologists we look at to determine whether or not a child is eligible a little bit more frequently. So for something like a specific learning disability or an other health impairment, which basically means that the child has a health impairment, for example, it could be ADHD or anxiety that is impacting the child's access to learning. So that's the first part of the question is, does the child meet criteria under one of those categories? And if yes, are they in need of special education supports? And for that, it's really important to remember that when the team is determining if a child is in need of special education supports, we're really looking to see whether there is something that is impacting a child's access to learning within the school environment. So sometimes it happens that there might be something going on at home, or parents are seeing, for instance, a behavior like inattention at home that we're not seeing in school. In a case like that, a child would not likely be eligible for special ed if it's not impacting them within the school and limiting their access to learning. And sometimes that can be tricky as a parent to understand. Really with special ed, what we want to know is it impacting the child's access to learning such that they need supports provided through special education? And then more importantly, what are those supports going to be? So once the evaluation report is issued, the team, and that's within the 60-day timeline, the team will be making recommendations as part of that report based on providing the child with what they need within what's called the least restrictive environment. And this basically means that we want to provide each student who is eligible for special education with the supports that they need to be successful while still keeping them within the general education setting to the maximum extent possible. And that's really where then we start to discuss the IEP, which is our next part of this presentation. So once you receive the evaluation, within 30 days, we'll be holding an IEP or an individualized education plan meeting, which is really the crux of where we talk about what is programming through special education going to look like for your child, and what supports is the school going to put in place to help them to be successful. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Katie.
Thanks, Naomi. So again, we're going to hold an IEP team meeting within 30 days of that report being issued. Another part of this process is, a lot of the members of the team in the evaluation process are part of the IEP team, but it's a parent, guardian, or a surrogate. If the student is old enough and it's appropriate for the student to be at the meeting, we always invite the students, particularly if they're age 14 or older, because we talk about transition planning, which we'll talk about as we go through the IEP. We have a regular education teacher, a special education teacher, the LEA or local ed agency representative. It's usually the building principal or one of the special education supervisors that serves that role. If the student is interested in attending the Western Center, we'll have someone from the career and tech ed there as well. If there are any community agencies involved, we would invite those representatives. If the student is gifted, we would have the gifted support teacher there as well. And then any other staff that are involved in the student's education that would be able to provide input. So whether that's the school counselor, a related service providers, OT, PT, speech, the behavior specialist. Some of our students receive counseling services through Lakeside, so the Lakeside counselor, student support counselor may be there as well. But again, anybody that is an integral part of that student's planning would be invited to that meeting. And the IEP case manager, or that special education teacher, is the facilitator of that meeting. They manage the paperwork, but they really get the ball rolling and they get the team together. They schedule the meeting, invite everyone. But that's a collaborative process to create that plan to assist the student, again, with accessing their education, providing the specially designed instruction. We talk about the accommodations and modifications and things. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris and Ashley to go through the IEP and how we develop the IEP for students.
Thank you, Katie. I'll start from a teacher perspective at the elementary level, and then Ashley, you can jump in more at a secondary level in case I'm forgetting anything. First off, Naomi, thank you for that overview. This is going to be a tough act to follow here, but I'm going to try my best. So once the evaluation is completed, like Katie said, we have 30 days to get everybody to a table and go over the IEP and come up with a plan. And I think the biggest part of that, which Katie and Naomi both talked about, the special ed teacher or the case manager is the facilitator of the IEP. All the decisions that are going to be made within the IEP is a team decision, and everybody at the table has an equal say, and it is truly a team approach. The teacher is kind of facilitating and making sure everything is moving along and writing the IEP. Some of the sections in the IEP, the first one is the demographic section, and that's basically just your name, address, phone number, your basic demographic information. It's not too in-depth or anything. Section 1 is the special considerations, and that's kind of a checkoff area where you go down and you talk about the different sections of the considerations, such as, is the student blind or visually impaired? Is the student deaf or hard of hearing? It could be a communication section, and sometimes people get confused with that, and speech is covered under that. Sometimes students need assistive technology to help communicate. And this is also the section where you check off whether or not the student has behavior concerns. Section 2 is the present ed levels. And this is, there's kind of 3 big parts of an IEP. And the present ed levels is one of those parts that's really important. Obviously, the whole IEP is important, but this is kind of the meat of the IEP. And this is where you're going to know exactly where your child is from an academic standpoint. So in the one section of the present levels is based solely on academics. And you're going to know, all the testing that Naomi and the psychologist did, all of that information is going to be present and up to date. So the whole team knows where the child is academically. Also in the present levels, there's a functional section, and that's where a lot of the behavior data is going to be found if there are behavior concerns. You're also going to find occupational therapy, speech therapy, and physical therapy in that section as well. If they're part of the team and your child qualifies for those services, you're going to see all of the information in the present ed levels under the functional section. Now, section 3, that is really important and much more paramount at the secondary level. At the elementary level, it's not that important because you're not transitioning to the workforce or college or vocation at the elementary level. So Ashley, if you want to maybe touch on the transition section, mainly at the secondary level.
Sure. Yeah, the transition plan is an essential component, especially at the secondary level, because we are looking at preparing our students for the future, whether they're students who are looking on going on to college or if they're looking to go to a technical trade school. So we really start preparing that when your student turns 14. So the IEP that's being held, if your child is turning 14 during that time, the transition plan will be in place. And there's 3 major sections of it. There's the post-secondary goal, there's the employment goal, and then there's the independent living goal. And within those goals, we can provide services to support your student in order to meet those goals. Just thinking off of the top of my head, especially looking post-secondary at the high school level, we offer several different accommodations and services to provide students that success. The Future Planning Center at the 1012 Center comes into play here when we're looking at students reaching that post-secondary goal. I'm thinking of their guidance counselors are an important part of the transition plan. Preparing them for SATs by taking the PSATs. So there's a lot of services that go into the transition plan. Also within the transition plan is a place where if your child is attending the Western Center, we can build it based off of the work or the field that they are in at the Western Center. So the transition plan really is more secondary, like Chris had said, and really the services are going to be individualized to your student based off of their post-secondary goals and their employment goals.
I can just jump in there too. We do, our teachers at the secondary level will send out a transition survey to parents to gather some information about, post-secondary from their perspective. And again, really talking with the student and a student transition survey, to collect that information as well so that we can do the best, we can with planning there. In addition to inviting any agencies that might be able to support with that transition.
And I think another important thing to mention is that when we really start looking at this transition plan, usually around 8th grade, is that plan's going to change over the years. So, we may be asking your child, what do they think that they're going to be doing once they graduate? And it's just to really get them kind of started on a path, because we know that path is very possibly going to change. More than likely it will change.
Thank you. The next section, I think we're at section 4, if I'm keeping track here, is the assessment piece. And that varies too at the different levels. At the elementary level, I think everybody's familiar with the PSSAs. And then when you transition to the secondary level, the keystones are then administered. And then there's always an adaptive test if it's relevant for the child, which is known as the PASA. Section 5 is the goals and objectives. I mentioned earlier that there's kind of 3 big parts of the IEP. The goals and objectives are another huge part of the IEP and kind of drives the plan. When the psychologist has the evaluation, the needs are kind of uncovered and discussed, and that's where we're going to develop the goals based on the need of the child. And those needs could vary. It could be an academic need. It could be a behavior need. It could be a speech, physical therapy, occupational therapy need. So each child has, a different plan and a different goal. And then the IEP facilitator or the special ed teacher is going to take progress and take data throughout every marking period and track the goal. And the goal is to, hopefully they're making progress. And at the end of each marking period, we send home progress reports to show where the student is for that marking period. And, at times the goal may need to be adjusted, and we can come back to a table, have an IEP meeting, and make sure that the goal is appropriate and attainable, and that the child is making progress. And if not, then we make a team decision and see how we can tailor that goal. A behavior support plan, if necessary, that isn't in every IEP. A lot of times during the evaluation process, an FBA or a functional behavior assessment is administered. And if it's deemed that the student does indeed have a behavior need, then a behavior support plan would be put in place. And that would, again, vary from student to student. And you would basically figure out what the child's triggers are and what the behaviors are that you want to work on. And you kind of want to come up with a plan to make sure that we're supporting the student and the behaviors in school. Section 6 is the kind of third big part of the IEP, and that's the specially designed instruction and services. And that is all the accommodations and modifications that we put in to help the child. And again, IEPs are so individualized that they're not the same for every child. Think of preferential seating. So if the child is easily distracted, they might sit closer to the teacher, and that would be in all classrooms. So if they're transitioning from a math class to a science class, that same preferential seating would be implemented across all the platforms. Sometimes students just need a little extra time when they're taking their tests, and we can put in accommodations for extended testing time. There's instances where students have a tough time with a large setting taking tests, and there could be some anxiety. We can put in some specially designed instruction to have testing being taken in a smaller group setting. Ashley, do you want to add anything for the secondary level for the SDIs?
One of the big SDIs that we have at the secondary level is we offer co-taught classes. So students, if they need that additional support, but they don't need the support from a learning support classroom because we want to keep them in their least restricted environment, we can provide them the support through the general ed curriculum in a co-taught class. So in a co-taught class, you have the general education teacher, and then you also have a special education teacher who offers the support. So your teacher has 2 science teachers in the same classroom or 2 English teachers in the same classroom. And that would be an additional support that will be provided through the SDIs.
Thank you for that segue. That takes you to section 7, which is least restrictive environment. And that is kind of broken up into 3 tiers. You have a full-time setting where the child spends most of the day, if not all of the day, in a special education classroom. The next least restrictive setting would be an itinerant level. And that would be where the child's spending some time within a general education classroom and a special education classroom. And then the least restrictive environment is an itinerant level, which the child is spending most of the day, if not all of the day, within the general education classroom. And then we have to report on that in section 8 with the Penn data section. And that is where you're breaking down the percentage that the child spends in the general education classroom. And then that data is reported out locally and at the state levels as well. And that's a 30,000-foot view of the IEP process. We could probably spend an hour on each section, but I wanted to kind of break down those parts in a in a broad range. I think, Katie, we're back to you.
Sorry, I was having a little difficult time with that mute button again. So really, again, when we're connecting those sections of the IEP, we're really looking at painting a picture, telling a story about your student, your child. What is it that they're really good at? What are their strengths? What are their needs? How do we best help them access their education? And again, I think that it's been mentioned, it's very different for every child. They might have the same disability in name, but it may look very different for each child. We really want to do all that we can to include students to the maximum extent possible. Least restrictive looks very different from one student to another. But we want to look at where their deficits are, and when we're creating those goals, where can we get them in 1 year's time? In whatever goal area that happens to be, reading, writing, math, again, those behavioral, social, emotional type goals. Again, least restrictive in terms of placement, where are they going to best be placed? I think the other point that is really important to make is that the IEP process is fluid, is the word that I'll use. We can meet as an IEP team anytime there's a concern, or even let's say the child is making, excellent progress, and we want to look at, maybe taking away some of those supports, that they're excelling, they've learned to, utilize the skills that they've been taught, and they might not need as many SDIs in the IEP. But again, important that, that parents know that they can reach out to that IEP case manager at any time. We can, call an IEP meeting, sit down with, whichever team members we need to be there, all of the team members if that's necessary. But again, really doing, all that we can to teach that student those skills that they need to be successful in the classroom and access their education. Does anybody else have anything else they want to add? Okay, so I think we have some questions.
We do, and thank you. I was trying to stop the screen share, but I was worried I might just stop the whole thing altogether if I did that. So thank you for stopping the screen share. So our first question, and again, if you have questions, if you've maybe been jotting them down, drop them into the Q&A box below. And I'll add them to the list. We do have a few questions already in here, which is great. So thank you. The first one, what are the requirements for attendance for the regular education teacher during IEP meetings?
So I'll take that one. We do require that a regular education teacher attend every IEP meeting. Not every regular education teacher that your student has is required to attend the IEP meeting. And we ask that they're there at least to give input as to how the student's progressing in the classroom. And generally, we like to have them there to go over the SDIs so that they're a part of the specially designed instruction that students might receive in their class and other classes.
Is the IEP provided before the meeting for parent review?
I'll take that one. We generally try to provide an IEP draft. Parents can certainly request that. Teachers are gathering that information. And I think it's really important to just even note there that it is a draft, as we go into the meeting, and that things can change within that meeting before, it's finalized. I realized one thing that we didn't mention, if I can just jump in here, is that after the IEP meeting, we issue what's called the NOREP, which is the notice of a recommended placement for the student. And so that just kind of goes through and it tells the parent, just to give an example, that the student will continue to receive services or begin to receive services in a supplemental learning support program. It talks about it being the least restrictive environment and talks about all of the factors that went into making that determination as a team. And then we ask that the parent just sign in and send that back in. So that's part of the process as well. I think we missed that in the presentation and just wanted to make sure we mentioned that.
Next question, can I bring somebody with me to the IEP meeting?
You can bring someone with you to the IEP meeting. We do generally ask that you let us know ahead of time if you'll be bringing someone to the IEP meeting, just so we know that who's going to be in attendance, so it can be noted on the attendance sheet. But yes, you are able to bring, some parents like to bring another family member. Some parents definitely have advocates that they bring to IEP meetings. So yes, you are able to bring someone to an IEP meeting.
Can I request a specific staff member attend an IEP meeting?
Yes, you are also able to request that a specific staff member attend the IEP meeting, and we will do our best to accommodate that. Obviously, if the staff member is not there that day or something like that happens, then that person may not be able to attend. But if there's a specific staff member that you would like to attend the IEP meeting, certainly we've had plenty of parents request that in the past, and we try to honor that request.
Upon transitioning to a new school, should we expect to be contacted by the new IEP case manager, or does this not happen?
Yes, so when you transfer from another school, if it's in state and it's during the school year, generally we will have an IEP meeting within 30 days to, update the IEP for our school. But we would ask that the IEP case manager would be in contact with the family before that 30-day timeline, just to introduce themselves so they know who to contact if there's any questions or concerns.
And what if that's a transition within our 4th to 5th or 7th to 8th, 8th to 9th transition?
So if you're transitioning within our school district, yes, we do ask our IEP teachers in the beginning of the year to make contact with all their families so that they're aware of who the case manager is. But that 30-day IEP process that I just spoke about doesn't apply then. That's only if you're transferring from another school within the state of Pennsylvania.
Yeah. And I'll add to that, if you're transferring us from a school that is out of state, then your child would be reevaluated by the school team, including the school psychologist. So anytime that a child transfers with either an IEP or a GIEP for gifted from a different state, then we reevaluate, and then that process is done within 60 days of the permission being signed.
If a student is in 2nd grade and he's getting an IEP, will he be eligible for an MDE?
So if the student is getting an IEP, then I would assume that they would have already had an evaluation, and that's how they got to that IEP process. What will happen for a student is students, once they are receiving supports through special education, students are automatically reevaluated every 3 years. That's a state mandated triennial reevaluation. This might include testing and it might not. We always test within every 6 years. At the elementary level, we try to test within every 3 years. It depends on the student and the student's needs and the team's determination. So if they already do have an IEP, and they're in 2nd grade, if they've just received that IEP and they've just had their evaluation done, then you'd be looking at a reevaluation in 5th grade.
You guys are just rock stars with these questions. I'm still gonna keep lobbing them at you. The next one, are evaluations done yearly or only initially? And what are the expectations for yearly IEP meetings?
So in terms of the evaluation, Naomi really just covered that. For most students, it's an every 3-year evaluation that occurs. In terms of an IEP, we're required to have an IEP meeting yearly, but any member of the IEP team could ask for an IEP meeting at any time during that year. So typically that's for one of 2 reasons. Either the student is having some sort of struggle we need to address and they're not making progress, or else, like Katie mentioned, it could be a student who is having great success. And so we want to possibly, we've had students who are in co-taught and want to go to non-co-taught classes, or are in small group classes and want to go to co-taught. So those are some of the reasons we might have an IEP meeting before that year mark.
Can you comment on the input need from parents prior to the IEP, such as email on parental items that need to be covered?
So I can comment on the input in terms of the evaluation process. So typically we'll ask parents to provide us with a structured developmental history, and this is looking at the child's milestones, any concerns that were in the past, any medical or physical conditions the child might have. And of course, it's at the parent's discretion always what they feel is appropriate to share. There may also be rating scales that the parent will fill out as part of the evaluation, because we want to look to see, especially when there's a behavioral concern or we're looking at a diagnosis of something like ADHD or autism, we want to see whether that's occurring across settings, both at home and school. And then very often the psychologists are giving you a call to talk about any concerns that you might have or follow up to any of the information that we've collected.
And then in terms of the IEP, sorry, Katie.
That's okay, go ahead.
We're really looking for your input on how, from your perspective, how your child is doing within the current program that's in place, as well as any additional concerns or goals you have for your child for the next IEP year.
And also at the secondary level, again, like I mentioned, that transition input, that transition survey is really important too. And generally, the special education teachers are reaching out to parents before the annual IEP to just, see what their questions, concerns are. And again, at age of 14, the transition survey.
How are parents kept up to speed during that 60-day window you talked about? For this individual, they feel their communication had not been great, and they were wondering where their child was in the gifted process.
So I guess it might vary psychologist to psychologist. Typically, we'll let parents know what the due date is. We're also reaching out to parents to ask them for input. And then as we get closer to that due date, then we're reaching out to parents again to share results with them, to find out if it's okay to send them reports by email. Certainly you can reach out to the school psychologist at any time if you have questions or concerns. None of us are ever going to shy away from hearing from a parent and encourage that. I would say it's just important to keep in mind that the case logs are very heavy, and within those 60 days, we're typically juggling, upwards of, maybe 15 or more students or cases at a time. So if you don't hear from your school psychologist, please don't feel that they're ignoring you, and please do reach out.
And a follow-up sort of to that, when you mentioned the caseload right now, are you receiving more requests this year, or is it about normal?
I don't know if a supervisor wants to comment on that one. I would say we're pretty busy.
Yeah, I would say that they're getting probably some more requests than usual. Would be my guess. I don't think that the pandemic helped. So I would say that generally, yes, they're getting more requests, and I'm not so sure our psychologists eat or take a break during the day. They are definitely hopping. We are very grateful for all that they do, for sure.
I absolutely agree with that, Amy.
If a child is graduated from IEP and the parents still strongly believe that the child is gifted, then how can they request for a GIEP evaluation?
So you can definitely request at any point. Parents can certainly make the request to have a child evaluated either for special education or gifted education once a year. It's really important to know that the team doesn't necessarily have to respond to that request with an evaluation, but they do have to respond and have the conversation and determine what supports are appropriate. The GIEP works under, or gifted works under, a different special education chapter than does a regular IEP. So depending on what that IEP was for, the school team might have information that will help them make a determination whether a gifted evaluation is appropriate. If not, then we do have a process that's put in place for gifted evaluations, which include a screening and talking with the student's teacher, as well as looking at some of that curriculum-based data to determine if a gifted evaluation is appropriate. So my recommendation would be to reach out to your school counselor. Typically, they're the ones who get that process started.
Okay, we're down to our final 3 questions. And usually when I say that, a few more come in, and it worked just like that. One just came in. So the next question, can you detail how a specific learning disability is determined?
Sure. I'll kind of give you specific learning disabilities can be complicated. So I'll kind of give you the quick rundown, and then I'm always happy to answer questions later on. So the first big important part of it are those interventions that are put in place before we even get to talking about an evaluation. It's important to keep in mind that, that an evaluation is looking for a disability. So we want that instruction and intervention put in place first, because we don't want to be in a situation where we're looking for a disability or determining that something could possibly be a disability when it's actually just a lack of instruction or intervention. And COVID has certainly made that very tricky. And in fact, that's one of the rule outs for a specific learning disability. We have to be able to show it's not a lack of instruction. When we do get to testing, Pennsylvania right now works under what's called the discrepancy model. And so what we look for is based on the child's ability, which we've looked at through their cognitive testing, and based on their achievement, is there a discrepancy between what they should be able to do based on ability and what they're actually doing and what their skills are showing based on that academic achievement? Now, it's really important to keep in mind with that not only does there need to be the discrepancy, the child also has to be achieving below age level expectations. And so sometimes we'll get really bright kids who have average academic scores. That's not a learning disability because they're still average. So we're looking for those kiddos who are falling below average. Additionally, we want to see that based on curriculum-based data, they are not meeting grade level benchmarks. So all that data, the MAP testing, the Fountas and Pinnell, the PSSAs, that the child is not where they're supposed to be. On top of that, when I'm assessing for a learning disability, I'm also looking to see, is there an area of cognitive need that might be telling me why the child is having difficulty in a specific area? So something with their working memory, something with their problem solving skills, their processing, their visual spatial processing, or their verbal comprehension. In addition to that, we also have rule outs. So one of those rule outs was the lack of instruction. Other rule outs include things like hearing or vision or motor needs, a cognitive ability that is significantly below average, any kind of emotional needs. We're also looking at cultural and linguistic considerations. So if a child is, if English is their second language, we would not yet be looking at a learning disability. And then if behavior is a really big concern impacting their access to learning, we may also not be looking at a learning disability. So that's kind of the short of it. Certainly as we go through the process, your school psychologist will take more time to explain that.
Erin, you're on mute.
I clicked the button and everything. Once a learning disability is identified, can a parent request an MDE?
So an MDE is really, it's a multidisciplinary evaluation, which is how we determine if the if there is a learning disability. So you don't need to request it because it's already been done. Once that has been done and we have identified a learning disability, then the next step in the process is that IEP.
Does the district test for dyslexia? If not, does a parent, how does a parent get their child tested? And does the district have a list of testing facilities? Or would a parent follow up with their doctor for a recommendation? I know it's sort of a three-part question, so take what you would like and let me know if you need me to repeat it.
Sure, so I could take this one. So yes, we do test for dyslexia. It used to be once upon a time that school psychologists did not use the term dyslexia because it was considered a medical term. Now, however, best practice tells us that we should be using that term. Things change really fast in special ed world sometimes. So we do test for dyslexia. That typically students who are exhibiting symptoms or signs of dyslexia fall under the category of specific learning disability, usually in basic reading skills. And then we also see those needs impacting oral reading fluency, reading comprehension, and written expression skills. So no, you do not need to reach out to a doctor or to another facility for that testing. If you did suspect that your child has dyslexia, again, they would follow that process that we've been chatting about with interventions first, seeing if what it can be put in place for the child is appropriate, and then, you know, eventually, if need be, going to that referral process and the evaluation. I am not aware of the district having a list of outside providers that we recommend, but I think this, I see the supervisors shaking their head no, so that'll be a no.
Who is the school psychologist for the 5th grade center?
That would be Melanie Sizemore-Adamo.
And she's awesome.
Can a future session be on transitions and planning?
Yes.
Amy, or
Yes.
so Katie, I
Yes.
don't know if you want to talk about this. I do have sort of our tentative rough draft pulled up, but I don't want to steal any thunder if you would like to speak to it.
No, so what we have done is based on the survey that parents have filled out, we have, you know, looked at all of those topics and we plan things out monthly. I cannot remember which month though transition is. Erin, do you have that?
It's in the spring, I think April or May, maybe.
We've moved it around a little bit. Yes, it would be scheduled for April. So what our hope is over the next month is to get everything together with all of the descriptions, tap all the people who need to be tapped. We have rough draft of dates and then get all of those dates shared out at once so we can book out our nights for the entire year. We'll all spend them together, maybe in person. I think we do have a few in-person spots earmarked, but virtual is nice as well.
Yes. And we have so many topics that we won't get them all covered this year, but that's okay because we can, you know, we can begin planning for next year even. So, but we're looking forward to this. And again, you know, if there are other topics that you think of along the way, I would encourage you to reach out to, you know, the grade level supervisor or, you know, any of us, even your child's IEP case manager who could pass that information along just so, you know, we want to do all that we can to support parents and really provide this programming to help answer those questions that are out there.
Circling back a little bit, are there specific reading recommendation programs offered for students who present with dyslexia?
So we do look at some programs, you know, there's Orton Gillingham based models, you know, we use a program with some students called Sunday. Some students receive Wilson instruction. It's all, it's working on phonics decoding skills. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in there on any other, Naomi, if there's any other.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not familiar with as many at the elementary level.
Yeah, Yeah, I can add to that and say when you do go through the evaluation process, and if your child is found eligible with a specific learning disability, and let's say it's in basic reading skills and it looks like dyslexia, when you get the recommendations at the end of the report, we don't make recommendations for specific programs. Simply because we don't ever want to tie a student to one program. Some programs will work for some kids and not work for other kids. And we want to make sure, just like we were chatting tonight about how that IEP process is, the IEP is fluid, we want to make sure that if we're trying something and it's not successful for the child, we have that option to try something else. So you'll see much more recommendations about the types of programming that a child might need based on what their strengths and needs are. But not specific to, you know, they need this program. And a lot of times some of those programs do have some overlap. So they'd be appropriate for a child with dyslexia, but they're also going to be appropriate for a child who's showing needs, maybe not with basic reading skills, but with, you know, oral reading fluency or comprehension.
And so as I look over in the participant list, Matt Jen, I see your hand is up. I'm not sure if that's a mistake or if you would like to speak a question or if you've typed it in. So I would suggest either maybe, okay. Your hand is down. That's okay, Matt Jen. And then a different Jen, if you have a question, you can pop that into the chat into the Q&A. Right now we are at the end of our questions. We do have two more, not questions, statements. Thanks for the presentation. That's from Matt Jen. Thanks, Matt Jen. And not a question, but very appreciative of this session. So those are two little tidbits. A shout out to the 6 of you who came on here tonight.
So I just want to say I really appreciate you know, all of you that joining us tonight. You know, we look forward to doing more of this, you know, and really, you know, sharing information and really helping to support parents, you know, with our special education programs, the processes, you know, again, that transition is a big thing, talking about supports coordinators for students that might need that in the future. So we're looking forward to that. I don't know if anybody else has anything else they want to share, but I just appreciate everybody being here tonight.
And we did record this session. So it takes a minute to export out at night. I'll usually export and leave it at work. By the time I come back in the morning, it's all done. But I would imagine somebody from your offices will probably be sending the recording out tomorrow. And we'll be able to maybe keep a little documented library of that information for everybody.
We will. Thanks, Erin.
We will need somebody to officially end it though.
Okay.
It's not going to
Well,
be
thank you all for being here. Have a great night.
Thank you.